Now, maybe it's because last week I was on vacation when quite literally every news story in America was breaking. You had all the Supreme Court decisions going on in my beloved Indianapolis. My gosh, there was a ton of news. And then, of course, there was the story of a coup. I mean, the first text I got from somebody in the know was, hey, you might want to take some cash out of the bank because if Putin decides to get angry, it's going to be nothing but cyber attacks against the U.S. banking system. And I said, oh, well, this is one heck of a way to start a vacation, isn't it? But for everything that took place in those 36, 48, 72 hours where Prigozhin was leading this PMC, this private military company, Wagner, and was heading up to Moscow, and he was going to take on Putin because Putin had attacked him, or he didn't attack him. Maybe it didn't matter. False flag, not false flag. This was a moment for Prigozhin. Next thing you know, he's a couple hundred miles from Moscow. He's not meeting any resistance. He turns around and he leaves. Next thing you know, Prigozhin's gone. Is he in Belarus? Nobody knows. The people who are part of his private military company are now signed up to be soldiers in the Russian army. Putin's still in power, but what actually happened here? Doesn't that matter? And why in the world would a story this big go so quiet, so quick? Guys, good to be with you. Welcome to the show presented by Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org. Economic liberty, free speech. That's where it's at. Let me bring in right now Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army West Point guy. Let's start from the beginning, because I think I've given a good overview of what happened in the lead up and then what happened thereafter, but no one's given a good answer to what the hell actually happened here. So walk us through the pieces. Why did Yevgeny Prigozhin, forgive me, why did he decide that somehow the Russian military attacked him, meaning Vladimir Putin attacked him through one of his ministers? Why did he decide to go straight on to Moscow? And why did he decide to turn around?
Yeah, Tony, you set it up very well. Great to be back with you. Let's take it from the very beginning. So he runs the Wagner Group, which is basically Vladimir Putin's private mercenary army. They have influence not just in Ukraine after fighting in Bakhmut and other places along the front, but they have tentacles in Syria. They have tentacles in Africa. They're on the lead of Russia trying to secure rare earth minerals, which are the whole world's fighting for those right now. And so, Prigozhin for the past few months had kind of set the table a little bit about a rebellion he might have based on some of the comments he'd been make about the support for Moscow. So the Wagner Group is not treated like regular Russian soldiers. They get fed better. They have better equipment and better uniforms. They're, initially they, out of prisons or so, but great, not great soldiers. But the bottom line is that they get funded. Well, he decided he had enough. This was a mutiny, no question about it. After those troops had been pulled off the front from Bakhmut. And Rostov-on-Don was a place where Russia has significant logistical support. And he decides to put a group together and do a road march and see how far they could go. Now, it's not a coup. They weren't looking to overthrow Vladimir Putin, but he was sending a signal to Shoigu and to Gerasimov, the other Russian military leaders, saying that they were doing poorly. He thought Vladimir Putin.
Wait 1 second. Let's take a step back. It wasn't a coup. Every conversation about it being a coup and Prigozhin was looking to take on Putin, take over Putin, that was all wrong.
Yeah, it wasn't a coup. It was a mutiny. And there's a difference, because a coup would mean, he would have to have taken over the communications. He would have to have done a lot to overthrow the government. Look, he got about 120 miles from Moscow. There was nothing stopping him from continuing to go there. It exposed the fact that the Praetorian Guard was nowhere in sight. They weren't able to protect the Kremlin, so to speak. No, it was a mutiny. It was designed to be a power play. And I think Prigozhin had complained he didn't think Russia was fighting violently enough, didn't think that they were moving fast enough. And so you bring it all together, but Vladimir Putin still looks at the situation at hand and says, he can't still throw those other two, Shoigu, who's the Minister of Defense, more of a politician. The other guy, Gerasimov, same thing, more of a politician. Neither one of them are soldiers. The bottom line about Prigozhin is this: he endures the hardship. He dresses up. He's got Instagram followers. He's good at communication. So from a leadership perspective, he was the one that was able to get the guys, the Wagner Group guys, to follow him on this mutiny and take it for as far as he can. He completely miscalculated, though. I suspected he thought he was going to win at the end of this, and he gets his life spared, but he's banished to Belarus.
Well, now that leads us to the follow-up question. Not a coup, a mutiny. Was the mutiny based on something legitimate? As in, did Putin's forces, did his ministers actually engage a bombing of Wagner forces? Or was that all just pretenses? We see a lot of false flag conversations that take place when we talk about Ukraine. And this was just an opportunity. Maybe he thought it was an opportunity to raise his cue.
Yeah, it would have to have been very well planned, but clearly the reports show that the Wagner Group fired on the Russian Air Force and downed a helicopter. There was casualties and everything. So it looks as real as possible. And for it to be this kind of, again, false flag, there's a lot of fiction going on here. It took a significant amount of planning. I think that he took it too far. I think he really thought that Vladimir Putin was going to back him up. And I thought that he thought that maybe Putin would put him in charge of all the troops. But Tony, the other thing too is those Wagner troops did not necessarily join the Russian military. Oh, no. They've been reconstituted. They're not being sent to the so-called front, like Hogan's Heroes, the Russian front. That's not happening. Right. You're seeing after the fact now that those individuals are going to get reconstituted back in places like maybe Belarus, maybe sent to Syria and Africa again. But Vladimir Putin's not giving up on the Wagner Group. He's had to come out against them because of what's happened to try to save some face. But he's not giving up. Each of these different groups now, the power, the oligarchs and the warlords, really is what they are inside of Russia, have their own private militaries. And right now, Vladimir Putin's got the best one in the Wagner Group.
So now, talking to Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army, this leads us to where is Prigozhin at this very moment, and is his life in danger? Is Putin willing to just leave it be? I mean, there was a report, Newsweek, I think it was, had the report, hold on, I think I have it right here, that the Putin deal hands Prigozhin $111 million in cash and gold bars, according to Russian media. That doesn't sound like a guy who's, fear for his life. Right. Where is he and what's going to happen to him?
Yeah, so he was traced to Belarus for a while. He's trying to get back some things. He's been spotted in Moscow, in fact. I again think there's going to be some time passing. He's not, he's popular amongst his troops. So you martyr him amongst the 25,000 or plus Wagner groups and soldiers that are out there. This is all about them as well. The rank and file that support him. If you look at his Instagram pictures, they're also in the pictures and the like. So, he gets to Belarus in 6 months from now, and if he has a formidable force there, now they could start the Little Green Man campaign that they did in Crimea, potentially into the Baltics, Latvia, Estonia. I know Poland has already activated its border. They're sending more than 500 more border patrol troops to there because they're concerned about him going there. So he still remains a wild card. I don't think he's getting, the cup of cyanide tea or pushed out the window just yet. I think Vladimir Putin's going to keep him alive and see how this thing breaks out.
Well, what's the win? He's popular with his troops. I get that. Is the win that if you kill him, those troops will also once again mutiny? Yeah. Or is there some other advantage that Prigozhin gets? Because look, a deal can always be struck, can always be made. Prigozhin clearly sees himself as a somebody, and there's no doubt that he is just as volatile and dangerous and bloodthirsty as we believe Putin to be. It's not like he's some kind of hero in this situation. So is there a possibility of seeing Prigozhin back in a place at Putin's side?
Yeah, it's kind of maybe not his side, but if you use the crime family analogy with what's going on in Russia, the Prigozhin's an earner. He makes money for the Kremlin. He makes money for Vladimir Putin, and that's why he's valuable. And the math is, if you take him out, that those revenue streams stop, his influence stops. But so he gets banished to a neighboring country, which is fundamentally an arm of the the former Soviet Union anyway. Belarus is friends I have from Belarus say they were raised Russian. I mean, it's really much more part of Russia than actually Ukraine could be. So, he's under the thumb there of Lukashenko in that situation, and now he pumps up Lukashenko, making him look good. I think Vladimir Putin is going to put some more time in between here, look for other things to distract, and eventually Wagner becomes, in 6 months, they get back to doing what they do best, and that's terrorizing other countries and taking material and taking advantage of it.
One of the things that got discussed when this happened, talking to Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army, was the idea that this made Putin look weak. It showed him to be weak on the world stage. You call it a mutiny, not a coup. Did the mutiny weaken Vladimir Putin to, never mind the world community, although that's part of the question, but to his own people and to his own military leaders and to those oligarchs who are wondering whether or not they need to keep up with this anymore, put up with this anymore?
So if you monitor the first 48 to 72 hours after, there's certain other individuals that have disappeared. Some oligarchs have left. This turned out to be a loyalty test, and those loyal have stayed, and they've reconsolidated. So I wouldn't say it weakened him significantly, maybe not strengthened him like he'd like to be. He didn't consolidate power, like you said, like you see in The Godfather. We didn't, that didn't happen. But overall, he's still calling the shots. He created that ceremony where the individuals that were responsible for stopping the convoy, for example, they were celebrated in one of the most historic places in the Kremlin there and in the outside. So they created enough pomp and circumstance around what happened. And they originally put out bad information on Prigozhin that said that he was funded. He has been stealing from the state, so to speak. But again, they can keep this information away from. That doesn't mean that going forward they won't continue to fund him and he does Russia's dirty work, which is really what he's been doing.
Now we take a look at where Ukraine is on all of this, because of course, if you're Vladimir Zelensky, you wanted Prigozhin to go all the way. You wanted him to be in Moscow. You wanted the bloody fight. Anything that would further demoralize the Russian troops, so-called troops, distract them, etc. Yeah. You don't get that. What is the situation now? Is Zelensky in a position where he can win? Or is this that the Russians just have so many bodies they're willing to throw at this fight that in the end, as you and I have discussed, one way or another, Vladimir Zelensky has given up the Donbas and this has to be over?
Yeah, Russia can make this kind of strategic mistake and have this kind of misstep and have it not affect the battlefield. And that's, you look back to, I hate to use an American analogy, but Abraham Lincoln took a long time for him to finally find the right general. The North made a lot of mistakes during the Civil War, and Robert E. Lee. A couple of days ago, July 3rd, 1863, probably the most significant day in the 19th century. If Pickett's charge succeeds and the South wins the battlefield, the day at Gettysburg, world's a different place. So you put that analogy over here to what's going on in Ukraine. The kind of mistakes Russia continues to make still won't matter because they have mass. They have 180,000 troops on the line right now. They're in dug-in defenses. They've been dug in for 6 months. And from my perspective, as much as we want to be as positive we can, this counteroffensive, they claim that took, for example, 14 square miles. I don't want to diminish any real estate they took back because that was done with blood and treasure from the Ukraine citizens and the like. But that's not really a successful counteroffensive. You can't have a counteroffensive without air superiority. You can't have a counteroffensive without shock effect. I mean, we're redefining this term to make it fit the narrative that they want us to fit, and it's just not there. So again, Russia can make this kind of mistake. It's not going to affect the ground. What's happening inside of Ukraine.
Let's talk about where Americans are in this fight. This was NBC News. Peter Alexander at the anchor chair speaking to a Republican congressman. Let me share this with you and get your thoughts.
Striking new polling from NBC shows that a majority of Republican primary voters right now say they would be less likely to vote for a candidate who supports funding Ukraine's war effort. You clearly have backed additional funding for Ukraine. What is your reaction to that number, and what is the consequence if the majority of Republicans, majority of members of your party get their way on that issue?
This is not a binary issue where it's either yes to more money or no, never to any more money. Most primary voters I talk to, and frankly, most members of Congress, they'd want to make sure that whatever we do in the future doesn't look like a blank check. We do need some accountability. It has been a lot of money. We do want to make sure the Ukrainian government is making good use of those dollars. And most primary voters I talk to are a lot more interested in providing lethal aid, making sure that the Ukrainian soldiers have the ammunition they need to hold the line. They're more comfortable with that than checks for, 10 or 20 or $30 billion.
That's an interesting number in terms of the amount of people, according to this poll, that state that if you favor supporting Ukraine, they're less interested in voting for you. All of a sudden, Ukraine becomes a litmus test for Republicans in a primary, which politically I don't think is a smart move at all, but neither here nor there. Is it your take that is probably where the Republican Party is? Is the Republican Party wrong in thinking that the support of Ukraine is a foolhardy idea?
I think the Republican Party is making a mistake, and they can explain why supporting Ukraine is in the best interests of the United States national security interests, because it is. And it's too bad it's becoming this political situation here. The bottom line is we have a country that's not in NATO that we're able to fund, basically fight a proxy war through, that is destroying the Russian military in place. It will never become the same military for the next 10 or 15 years, maybe even 20 years. It's destroyed its ability to wage foreign military sales because of the equipment that they're using is crap, and everybody's seeing it in the hands of Russia. We see NATO working together like we've never seen them before. We see Germany involved. We see France involved. We see the British sending equipment that they hardly have. We can't say enough about what Poland is doing. So net, this has become a unifying event, given what's going on. And if you look at United States national security interests, it's in our interest right now. We're in for a penny, in for a pound at this point as well. So to all of a sudden think we're going to pull the plug on it, who knows on the timeline? Who knows how that's going to go? But let's hope at least it doesn't get the politics and get in, become a football over the next 2 years.
You're arguing that it's in the United States' best interest. You still believe this, that it is in the U.S. best interest to keep supporting Ukraine with the dollars and with the hardware, but not with troops.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly right. And that number shows you the administration has done a crappy job of explaining that. What are the interests here? What are there? I mean, there's no other guarantees. There's no guarantee that Ukraine becomes part of NATO. There's nothing else here. They want to fight for their independence and freedom. They think they could do that. I was first concerned about the United States, kind of managing the slow destruction of Ukraine. But we're seeing that Russia does not have this capability to vanquish Ukraine. Now, Ukraine doesn't have it either. And even if we gave them F-16s and ATACMS and all these other strategic weapons, they're not vanquishing Russia either. So at some point, they get tired. Vladimir Putin maybe has a real coup. Maybe he's out. There's lots of things that could go on. But I think you're going to see resolution at some point based on the amount of material and things that are getting destroyed there. And again, it's still in our best interest.
Let's, before I let you go, so much talk has been about Zaporizhia. Yeah. Man, that's a difficult one. That's a hard one right there. And this is a nuclear power plant. Right. And the Russians say that the Ukrainians are trying to blow it up. And the Ukrainians say that the Russians are trying to blow it up. And when a lot of people are talking, there's the possibility that these people will blow up a nuclear power plant. Is there a possibility that these people will blow up a nuclear power plant? What is the real story here?
Right. So first of all, the power plant is offline. There are 6 reactors that have been offline. 4 of them have been offline for the past 9 months. The last one was just taken offline the last few days ago. The one before that was a few months ago. So there's no situation of like a Chernobyl. There's not going to be an internal explosion that's going to cause radioactive material to fly through the sky and the like. Now, that's not to say it can't be destroyed. It can't be bombed, or it can't be wrecked on some level. And there is nuclear material inside the reactor. It has to still be maintained because of the way the nuclear rods work. There still has to be auxiliary power that has to make sure that those rods stay cool. Okay. Now, again, it sits on the wrong side of the Dnieper River. It sits on the southern side where the Russians are, and the Russians have now kicked all the Ukrainians out of there. So the Russia now has 100% responsibility for that. So if something does happen to it, the whole world will blame Russia. I suspect from anything, it's from a scorched earth perspective, it might be destroyed, or it might have, it might be rendered inoperable for a few years. But I don't see any kind of catastrophic event that's going to take place. Even if they put some landmines on the top, or if they put landmines around it, they're just trying to kill the soldiers that are going to eventually try to liberate it.
But with the Russians, the ones who will take the heat, certainly the back and forth makes more sense. Now, before I let you go, can Zelensky and Ukraine win this? And what exactly is win?
So here's my definition of win. First of all, they have to mount a true counteroffensive. They have to figure out a place that they can actually create shock effect and puncture Russian defensive forces, either using artillery, using combined arms, having some level of air superiority at some place. They have 9 brigades still in reserve. They're still 8 to 12 weeks away from NATO equipment showing up. NATO equipment gives them survivability. That's the thing Ukraine can't have is casualties, okay? Ukraine has got to have crews that are sitting in tanks that survive. They're going to be able to plow through obstacles and live and to fight. I think that still has to happen in the south. I think you have to trade off what's going on in the north. It looks like the Russians are having some kind of counteroffensive in the north, trying to retake Kherson because the Ukraine had a counteroffensive last September and took that city back. So Russia is all about the past, all about trying to get that back. The only way that Ukraine gets Russia to the negotiation table is if they can break through in the south and threaten Crimea. Now you see Zelensky saying he wants to take Crimea. I don't think he has the material to do that. He would need 300,000 men to do that. But if he threatens it, if he can bring ATACMS, we bring others, give them some more things, some more drones, give them the kind of the next level of equipment there. If he threatens Crimea, then he gets Russia to the negotiation table. But he still might lose Crimea because, as we've talked about, Tony, Crimea is the most strategic, important military Navy base that Russia has.
But you're making the argument that Putin would fold after over a year and this trying to convince his own people that this is in their best interest and the best future of Mother Russia. He could fold and walk away with nothing. That's on the table.
Well, he would, if all of a sudden you had 20,000 Russian soldiers surrender, he would be forced to negotiate. He would stop at ceasefire prior to, letting it go any further. And I think part of that negotiation would be he would still want to keep Crimea. He might want to keep some of those areas up in the Donbass region. He might want to create a new border. I think he would just use it as a way to buy time, because knowing full well that they don't have the resources to take Crimea. They would have to then pivot, go to the south, and then leave themselves exposed in the northern areas there. So that's the key. He has to threaten Crimea, not take it. And I don't think Vladimir Putin would have any other choice but to say, let's have a ceasefire. Now, that's not to say the Russians still wouldn't stop digging in. They still couldn't start the war. It would be like North Korea and South Korea. You might have a ceasefire that exists for the next 50 years. Who knows? Which would then put a damper on Ukraine joining NATO, because you can't have a NATO country that doesn't have a secure border. That's one of those requirements, and that alone would keep Ukraine out of NATO. And if that's good for Vladimir Putin, that might be good enough for now.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have a conversation about Ukraine and NATO another time. Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and I appreciate all of you being here and being a part of the shows and everything that we do over here. Don't forget to subscribe on Rumble. Even if you're seeing this on YouTube or other places, Rumble is the place to subscribe and find everything I do at TonyKatz.com. And my thanks, as always, to Americans for Prosperity, Economic Liberty, Free Speech. Find the state chapter near you. Go actually get something done that's worthwhile. It feels good to actually do something. I can tell you that from personal experience. Guys, I appreciate y'all.